Hello and welcome. I'm Tarrin. Thank you for tuning in to the Indigenous Prosperity Podcast. I do want to acknowledge and express gratitude that the Indigenous Prosperity Center and our sister organization, the South Island Prosperity Partnership, operates in the territories of 10 First Nations, including Sihanouk, Sauk, Kashida First Nations, the Lekwungen Nations, Songhees and Esquimalt, and the WSÁNEĆ Nations, Tsartlip, Sayote, Sycam, Pocatchin, and Malahat. Through this podcast, we seek to amplify voices that support truth and reconciliation and Indigenous-led economic development on Southern Vancouver Island. Today, we're joined by Sage Lacerte, founder and CEO of the Sage Initiative, and Magnolia Perron, the Indigenous Women and Youth Lead at the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association and a graduate of the Sage Initiative cohort. Welcome, Sage and Magnolia. I invite you to introduce yourselves to our audience.
Thank you for having us, me and my cousin Magnolia. It's always a pleasure when we get to be in circle together. Hadit Sage Lacerte Sedney. Hello, my name is Sage Lacerte. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a carrier woman from the Lake Babine Nation in North Central BC and the founder of Sage Initiative, which I'm sure we'll talk plenty about. And usually in my positioning, just like to mention that a really core theme in my life and in this work is to rematriate and to kind of come back to some of those practices in many of our cultures. And in my nation, Lake Babine Nation, we're matrilineal people. So I'm a part of the Bear Clan. I got that from my mama. She got it from her mama and her mama and her mama. And so I want to bring back some of those practices. I also do that by supporting the birth of Black and brown babies on Southern Vancouver Island. I'm a doula, a part of the Nesting Doula Collective, and I always like to mention that I think there's a really intimate connection between empowering Indigenous women with knowledge surrounding money and wealth, and then supporting the birth of our babies in a really good way, in a way that's healthy and kind of turns away from some of those practices that have harmed our people. And then the last piece is that I heard that my sister was on the podcast recently, Raven Lacerte. She's the founder of the Moose Hide campaign, and I'm so proud to work alongside her. There's a lot of violence that occurs towards women and children in this country, and I'm not okay with that. So we work really hard to make sure that our communities and our women and children are safe through the campaign. And I'll ask Magnolia to offer whatever introduction you're comfortable with today.
Thank you, Sage. So hi, everyone. My name is Magnolia Perron. I'm joining today from the traditional unceded Algonquin territory here in Ottawa, Ontario. That's where I have the privilege to live and work. My roots are back in Tyendinaga Mohawk territory, and I'm a member of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte, but I have mixed ancestry. I'm Mohawk and French Canadian on my dad's side, and I'm Jewish on my mom's side. And in terms of my professional work, I currently am the Indigenous Women and Youth Lead at the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association. We go by NACA for short, and we're a national Indigenous organization made up of members, which are Indigenous financial institutions who provide financing and loans to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit entrepreneurs across Canada. So, financial literacy is a big part of my work that I do in supporting Indigenous women and youth to start and grow businesses. And funny enough, actually, Sage and I met back in like 2019 when we were both studying at the University of Victoria. And I think we had one class together, but we didn't really know each other at the time. But that's how I knew who Sage was. And I think found out about the Sage Initiative from, following each other on social media and just watching her journey. So it's pretty cool how we, it started a few years ago by taking a same course at the university. And now here we are today on a podcast talking about the Sage initiative. And I have lots of good things to say, and I know I'll have the opportunity to share about my experience as we go on. So I'll pass it back over to you.
That's really amazing. I really enjoyed hearing both of your backgrounds, and it makes me think that, you know, some people come into our lives for a reason, and that's very unique the way that you two met in a university class. Amazing. So I would like to start this off by talking about the scarcity mindset. So many individuals and communities have been impacted by the trauma associated with colonial money and the scarcity mindset it can perpetuate. So can you share your insights on the process of unpacking this trauma, what it signifies, and how this scarcity mindset can hold people back in their personal and professional lives?
Yeah, it's really one of the core reasons why Sage Initiative emerged in the first place. And I appreciate that you nodded to the historical nature of institutional racism that has occurred towards Indigenous peoples in Canada. And what I found is that from my own experience growing up, I did not have a lot of access to financial knowledge. And that was a direct result of my mom having attended the LeJac Residential School and my dad having attended a church-run day school. And those pieces of knowledge and life skills weren't their experience while they were there. And same with their parents. And so for a lot of my friends at school, I felt quite isolated and always had a lot of money burdens at home. We grew up poor, and but although I would like to make a distinction between something that I think is really important, which is the Indigenous definition of wealth. And so in my mindset, growing up, I felt like I was super wealthy because I had access to my territory. I've hunted since I was born. I've always had a really good relationship with my grandparents and my parents, all of my cousins. I'm learning my language, and I was gifted all of the phenotypical features of a carrier person, proud cheeks and big lips called bedegwits in my language. And so I grew up feeling like I was very wealthy, and knowing that, really internalizing that, that was something that I was really proud of, because when I went to school, although there was an obvious difference in our socioeconomic stratas between me and my peers, it felt like there was a huge difference because they lacked culture or a sense of a connection to their culture. And I learned the difference between Indigenous concepts of wealth as compared to what it means to be rich or abundant from a Western mindset. The last thing I'll say about a scarcity mindset or a sense of lacking is that it's this lens that we put on, and it really is about limiting beliefs. It's all of those believies and limiting beliefs and sense of guilt or shame that we carry around about what we think money is and what our worth is. And so it puts these constraints on us and limits the possibilities and opportunities that we see based on those blinders. And so I think that the reason why Sage Initiative came about in the first place wasn't to continue re-perpetuating how important it is to invest. And that is a component, but the main thing was to shift our mindset back into that Indigenous perspective of what the worth of money is. And it's meant to be treated like good medicine. It's meant to create opportunity. It's meant to take away those blinders. And so that's what the circle was originally meant to feel like. It's to move away from that scarcity mindset. And I think I think it's working. It's been working for me. I don't know about you, Magnolia, but or if you would like to speak to the scarcity mindset piece at all.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add a few things. I really liked what you shared, Sage. I think when I reflect back growing up, money was like a source of conflict in the household. It created a lot of feelings of uncertainty and fear. And so I think when I was growing up, and I'm just talking from personal experience, I think I didn't really realize how growing up in what conversations were like in my family and my household around money really shifted and shaped my relationship towards money. And I think, it impacts people in different ways. Sometimes when you grow up in a household where there isn't a lot of money, sometimes you don't know how to save, or you get money and you spend it right away and things like that. For me, I think the way it's kind of played out in my life is I've always been really afraid of things. Like I want to hold on to it all and I'm afraid to spend it. And I just want to like hoard it essentially for that sense of security. But I think as I've gotten older and I was able to like participate in the Sage initiative, for example, I've been able to really like unpack how those experiences in childhood have played out in the way that I manage my own money in adulthood. And I think once you become aware of that, it's like regaining that power back. And you're like, hey, I don't need to let that control my money decisions now or my attitude towards money. And I think like what Sage mentioned about money being a tool, I think that really resonated with me, and I think resonates with a lot of our peers, that money doesn't have to be a bad thing, because I think in a lot of our minds, especially connecting it back to colonialism and things like that, we just think money is bad and evil and the source of all problems. But when we change our mindset, like what Sage was saying, and seeing it as a tool and a medicine to help us reach our personal and our family and our community goals, it becomes really powerful. So I think I'll maybe leave it at that for now, but I have lots more I could say on the topic for sure.
Yeah, I think all three of us could probably keep going on this one question, just because there's so much to unpack there. I do want to say, like, I just feel a real connection to both of you as you're speaking through this, and I deeply relate because, I became aware of the concept of money at a very young age, same with both of you, and it's a huge amount of anxiety surrounding that growing up. And I've carried that with me throughout my adult life, and, working really hard on shifting, my mindset around what is wealth, and understanding that, wealth doesn't always mean just money, monetary. It can mean, friends, family, like you were speaking to, Sage. It's, so much more than just what you have in the bank. And I'm really, really looking forward to continuing this conversation. I think I'm going to walk away with a lot of knowledge, and thank you so much for sharing.
Well, Tarrin, it sounds like you are very eligible for the upcoming Sage Initiative cohort in the fall, and know that there's always a seat for you. It's meant to be a really open circle where folks can come when they're ready, because we might not necessarily be ready in that moment, but it's cyclical. So just hear me when I say that this circle was built for you. And if this feels relevant to you, and if it feels like something that you could benefit from, or your friends could, we are hosting a session in the fall for Indigenous women across Canada who want to change that mindset, that scarcity mindset.
That's pretty amazing. And it warms my heart. And I feel like kind of I'm at a point in my life where I would really, really love to participate in something like that. I think I would gain so much knowledge and clarity. So thank you for sharing that. And that kind of brings us right into the next topic. So I'd love to learn more about the framework of the Sage Initiative cohorts. And so how do these cohorts empower Indigenous women in becoming impact investors? And what unique opportunities or resources do they provide for participants to further their learning and growth in the field?
Yeah, Sage is a really interesting entity because it's kind of taking shape based on what the cousins ask for. We purposefully didn't make a super solid structure in a traditional form. We didn't go the institutional education route. We wanted to make it really community-led, and also have as many community partners and contributors from all walks of life be a part of it. The kind of layout of the actual circle is that we meet over the course of 6 months. And so each month, usually we meet the third weekend of the month. It just kind of lands that way. So we meet the third weekend of every month for 6 months. And it's really based on circle protocol. We have an opening ceremony and a closing ceremony to make sure that we do our work in a good way. But what we try to do is incorporate a lot of love, a lot of community-centered connection. We try to incorporate a lot of circle, or as much as we can, to just get folks to be able to share about themselves and their experiences and the things that they're really kind of uncovering throughout our time together. And then we do learn some more technical investing skills, which can make you get into what we call the window of resilience. Is kind of when you're anywhere between a 4 and a 6 on a 10-point scale. So if you're between a 4 and a 6, you're like in your window of resilience and you feel really good. But we do kind of push that a little bit, and we get to the point where we talk about technical investing skills that are brand new to every single person in the room. And then you feel that in your body a little bit. You're like, oh, I don't know this. This feels really new. It can feel really scary, and I feel a little bit defensive in this space. And so we unpack some of those teachings, whether it's in the public or private market, whether it's conducting due diligence on really cool new Indigenous businesses and entrepreneurs, or even getting to the point where we have some of those entrepreneurs pitch their ideas to us, and can make those relationships with folks who are making real change in social purpose businesses across Canada. So the overarching ultimate goals of Sage Initiative is to come out of the circle with cousins that you can turn to for the rest of your life. You can always say, I was in a circle with Magnolia when we were in our 20s, and we made a very active choice and effort to change that mindset. But we also gained all of these skills and capacities to make a small or medium-sized investment in Indigenous-owned social purpose business. And because I took that training, now my friends know a little bit more about some of those skills. Now my family knows more. Now I can apply this to my community potentially. Now I can take on a role that could potentially have not just a community level impact, but a systems level impact. Like the position that Magnolia is in. She's already working with NACA, and she had come to us already in her position at NACA and said, I want to continue growing. I want to keep leveling up. And I was like, okay, boss, like, let's do this, you know? So the structure, I think, was built to create a lot of breathing room for folks. We didn't want to rush into anything. We didn't want to do anything too quickly. but at the end you would receive a certificate of completion from us and be able to say that you took that training and you have those skills in your tool basket.
That's amazing, Sage. I'm just so like engaged. I could listen to you speak forever. And it's getting me really excited to the possibility of participating in a cohort. And I love that the framework is so incredibly flexible, because I find, I've been a part of programs that are so rigid, and it actually, makes me at points, it drains me. And I feel like people, it's much more likely that people shut down when there's no flexibility or room to just be in your learning.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm so excited to hear from you, Magnolia, on this topic. I would love if you could share your insights and experiences regarding your participation in the Sage Initiative cohort.
Yeah, thank you for asking the question. I always tell Sage and always tell other people I'm like the #1 like fan or supporter of the Sage Initiative. I think it's an incredible program. And as I mentioned, I think I had Sage on maybe, social media, maybe Instagram, and that's how I found out about the program. And actually, I think it was through maybe your participation in another program too, where I learned a little bit more about what you were doing. It might have been like the Fireweed Fellowship or a program like that. And at that time, I would have been working with NACA for about 1.5 or 2 years. And I've been privileged to be in this role where I'm, developing program for Indigenous women, entrepreneurs, to help them start businesses. And one of the things we realized in developing the program is that there was a need to talk about finances, and not just like managing finances in a business, but just how we manage our personal finances, and started to learn about things like the trauma of money and so on. And at the same time, I was going through this like personal journey of, better understanding, my relationship with money, as I talked about earlier, and also, trying to educate myself on, things, not just saving, kind of moving beyond just saving, but how can I now take this money that I've saved over, the last few years and do something meaningful with it. And I think for a lot of people and a lot of Indigenous people, like traditional investing doesn't always like sit right or feel good with us, and we want to do investing, or we want to use our money for good. And so how can we find ways to take our money, invest in something that also aligns with our values? So I was kind of learning about impact investing at the time I learned about Sage Initiative. And I was like, yes, this is what I need right now in my life. So I think I like applied as soon as the applications opened. And I was so grateful when Sage reached out and we had that initial conversation. And I have to admit, even, starting in my role with NACA, there was a lot of terminology in, the business and finance world that I did not know. And I was trying to learn as I, was in my role, but I think that was really big. One of the things that, Sage Initiative did in terms of like adding that technical component is I felt more confident in the terminology that I have to use both, in my personal life when I'm making money decisions, but also then in my professional work that I do too. So that was really great. And I think in terms of, you were talking, Sage, about the framework of the program. And that was one thing I really valued, was that it felt like a really good balance between the technical skills, but also that time for reflection and just getting to know each other as a cohort, and sharing with one another and integrating, like, the opening and closing ceremonies. There was such a great balance between those two things that I really, really appreciated. Because sometimes if the scale is not balanced and it's too heavy in one or the other, you may feel like, oh, I didn't get what I wanted out of this program because I did want to learn about what it means to be an impact investor. But then on the other hand, you're not feeling like too overwhelmed where it's like too technical, too over your head, where you don't even want to participate because you feel so overwhelmed. So I really appreciated that balance. And I think another big takeaway for me was just getting to know everyone. And it was so great this past January. Sage brought us all out to Victoria and we got to meet in person, which was so incredible. You spend so much time with these people over, a 6-month period through the sharing circles and through the weekend courses. So to be able to actually come together and kind of celebrate and gather in person was such a beautiful thing to do after the fact. And I really feel like the relationships I built with the other cohort members, as Sage said, are for a lifetime. And I know, I'll continue to stay in touch with those people and continue to, cheer them on, and excited to see like the success that brings to them and to their families and communities. And overall, it's been just like a really amazing experience, and I highly recommend that you participate in a future cohort if you have the opportunity to do so.
That's amazing. Beautiful, Magnolia. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, the cohort. Just to follow up, is there any advice that you would offer to anyone that is thinking about participating and applying for the cohort?
Yeah, I think if you are interested and maybe thinking about it, but on the fence, just apply, have a conversation with Sage. I think Sage, you do an amazing job at making people feel really comfortable and meeting them where they're at. And I think even in our cohort, we had people at all different levels. If you think of, financial literacy or, investing literacy on a continuum, we had people kind of at different levels. And I think all were welcomed. And the other thing I would say kind of related to that as, I guess, advice during the sessions, there's going to be times where you are going to feel a bit like overwhelmed, like, wow, this is a lot of new information. And, maybe sometimes you're like, I'm not quite sure what they're talking about, or I'm not sure if I'm understanding it right. And it can be really scary to ask questions because you're like, am I the only one who has no idea what's going on or what they're talking about? But I think not being afraid to ask those questions. And I think, again, Sage, you do an amazing job at creating that really like safe environment where people feel comfortable. And I always really appreciated when others ask questions, because often they would ask things that I was thinking, but maybe was a little shy to ask. And I really appreciated the sharing circles where it was just Sage and the cohort, because it was kind of a smaller group. And I think it created a space where we were a lot more comfortable to like share with one another and kind of be open and things like that. So I think I would just, one, recommend people to apply, have the conversation with Sage, learn about the program. And then two, if you're in the program, really take advantage of that opportunity to ask questions freely, because it's not often you're in a space where it will feel so safe to do so.
That's amazing. It sounds like you walked away with some really, really beautiful relationships. So that really speaks to me. Thank you so much for sharing. So the SAGE initiative aims to empower Indigenous women by equipping them with the necessary skills and pathways to become impact investors, honoring Indigenous concepts of commerce. So could you elaborate on how the Sage Initiative envisions building a national ecosystem of Indigenous women impact investors?
Yeah, well, I mean, the vision, our vision is to have this national ecosystem of cousins who have all received the training and contributed to the training. But our network is very large. It consists of many community partners and mentors, folks who come in who have that lived experience, who want to contribute their knowledge. Just kind of thinking back to me sharing about how my parents, aunties, uncles, grandparents, they didn't have those skills. So the mentorship that I might have found from family might need to come from cousins and aunties and uncles that we source kind of in broader networks. And so there's a really beautiful opportunity for, and it can be discussed in lots of different terms, but essentially economic reconciliation, where folks are willing to share knowledge and their privilege in the space, which has been dominated for a really long time and was not created to benefit Indigenous peoples. So we're trying to create this space and that feeling that Magnolia is talking about, like feeling like, oh, okay, now we're in circle. Now we can really say what's been on my mind, those questions. And we want to try to build that network so it can feel like that with those partners and with our mentors in the room. And so our first, I have to mention that our first two cohorts, Sage Initiative was recognized by Grand Challenges Canada and the Indigenous Innovation Initiative as a bold idea, as an innovation founded by an Indigenous woman entrepreneur who they wanted to support and see it transition to scale. This feels like something that can have a huge impact on our communities by essentially creating a circular economy, by keeping wealth in our communities, by investing into Indigenous-owned businesses. So they saw that as this huge opportunity. Our first 2 years were supported by the Indigenous Innovation Initiative, I3. And so now that we're kind of growing our own legs and are into our third year of Sage Initiative circles, we're trying to define what that looks like in order to make sure that we welcome folks from all around Canada. Those who are eligible are Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, non-binary folks. In this particular cohort between the ages of 18 and 50. But those demographics and lines are always kind of shifting and changing based on need, and who are the folks that really are coming up for us that are saying, hey, like my community really needs this. And so we're always happy to chat with people, and I appreciate Magnolia for mentioning just throwing your name in the hat and seeing if you're 52 or just interested but not sure if it's for you. I think that's really valuable. But the idea for me is that when I wanted to make my first investment and I didn't know how and I didn't have those skills, I really wanted a training like that. And I want to be able to provide that training for all Indigenous women across what we now know as Canada, to be able to have that knowledge with them. And over the next few years, it's our responsibility and our duty to scale. And ideally, in my visions, we would be able to have a somewhat regional model so that folks can meet each other from their own regions. Folks in the north can come together and talk about specific concepts of commerce that are relevant to you in the north. Or in particular, when we had our session in Victoria and kind of focused a little bit on BC, we talked a lot about carrier traditions, the traditions of my people. We talked about potlatch. And so it would be so beautiful if we had a session for Métis folks, and we were able to run in this region where we would be able to provide all of these kind of place-based context pieces. Would be really, really gorgeous. I want youth, in particular, Indigenous youth, to feel like there's someone there that's saying, hey, if you don't have folks around in your community that are providing you with this knowledge, then have it. It's here for you. It was created for you, with the lens of the intersections between our gender identity, between our age, between our race, between our sexuality. This is really a space where folks can be very open about those things, because patriarchy creates competition between women in this space and tries to pit women and queer folks against each other and against the state. And so in order to create more comfort for my indigiqueer babies, I was so queer and awkward all through university, and didn't know how to be, and I just didn't identify with the like finance bros and didn't know where I belonged. And so I want to find a place where indigiqueer youth and women and two-spirit folks from across Canada can come and they can take what feels good for them. And if something doesn't feel good, like if some of these teachings about the public market, like stocks and bonds, they're like, ooh, like that's not for me. Like I want to leave that there, but I'm going to take what feels good for me and apply it. And then we just give them like 2 thumbs like way up, and we're just happy to see them take what they can and apply that knowledge. So that's the vision for this national network. I want to see it really blossom, and for folks to be able to take what works for them and apply it in their own communities.
That's wonderful. And can I just say, it's so incredibly beautiful that you talk about, you know, growing up, there wasn't an outlet or organization like the one you've created for yourself growing up. So, you know, you took that and you created it for all the other people. And that's amazing, just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So this next question is actually rooted in something I currently am struggling with as a student, and I would love to hear from both of you on this. So going through a university system, how did you decipher your core values from a colonial framework of learning?
I can speak to this briefly. I was really, really glad to have chosen, I went to the University of Victoria. I was really glad to have chosen to go into a program that was inherently quite decolonial. The gender studies program at UVic teaches a lot about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I really wanted to apply a lot of that knowledge in writing policy. Because of my position at the Moose High campaign and how much we do so much intergovernmental relations, I really wanted to be able to support in that way. But what I found was that as soon as I graduated, which was spring 2020, if everybody remembers, global pandemic. So yeah, it was a really, really rough time to graduate.
Wow.
And have no idea what to do, and really wanting to have an idea. I had this idea. I was like, I know that Indigenous entrepreneurs only receive 4% of venture capital in Canada, and it's much less for women, and it's much less for two-spirit entrepreneurs. It's basically zero. It's very, very small amount of money. And so I was like, how can I get money into their hands so we can support these entrepreneurs? And if I had gone to business school, then I would have been taught the same framework and structure that everybody else learns and everybody else applies. And then I would just continue to re-perpetuate that, which is fine. I think that business administration is super important. But what I learned in my program was to practice critical thinking and to maintain my own values that I was raised with from my culture, rather than what might necessarily be the best in terms of our business success and performance and our business model. I wasn't building it based on business success. It was so much like more heart-centered in that space. And so I really appreciate that. And like I mentioned, like Sage Initiative, when you receive a certificate of completion, it's not an institutional like course, like it's not recognized necessarily by a university, but that just inherently questions what knowledge is valuable and what knowledge is worthy, and how we place worth on certain knowledge. Like if you go to an institution and you pay money, like does that mean that that knowledge is more worthy than what you might learn in community or in circle, for example? So I think it just decentralizes the importance, the like inflated self-importance that you often find in the academy. I mean, I'm a huge nerd and an academic. Unfortunately, I just kind of I went that way, but I definitely feel the tension between Western knowledge structures and institutions versus Indigenous sites of knowledge production. It's something that has been a huge tension in my life forever, and it will always be like that. So I noticed that a lot, particularly at UVic, because that's where I went to school. But yeah, it's something that has, I don't know, sat with me since I graduated.
Yeah, I relate to that quite a bit. Sometimes I feel like I'm being, like I'm a rope that's being pulled in two different directions. And I feel like sometimes I have that foot in both worlds. And I just have to, I take time to like often reflect inwards on what I want to put out into the world.
Currently a student?
Yeah, so I'm currently at Womxn, so I'm finishing up. I've got about a year and a half of my degree, so it's a BBA with a major in marketing is what I would come out of it with. And yeah, just sometimes I, will be sitting in a class and, just these thoughts will bubble to the surface of, is this the framework that I want to take out of this and then apply to the world? Like it's a lot of reflecting inwards. And yes, thank you so much for your perspective, because I really relate to that quite deeply.
Yeah, I definitely can echo a lot of what Sage and you shared. I think for me, what's helped me, like, I feel like I've done so much school. I've done like 3 different programs. I did an undergrad, a graduate diploma, and then a master's. So I feel like Sage, I'm a bit of like an academic and a bit of a nerd that way. And I'm like a big advocate for like learning and going to school, but I think it's really tough when you're placed in an institution and it's so huge and you're just like a number. So it's really easy to kind of get lost in the shuffle. And then on top of that, like the way we are taught and the way we're expected to learn just doesn't always like align with our values or with the ways we learn. And I think like what helped me, like reflecting back even on my undergrad, which I went to at the University of Ottawa, was I got involved with the Womxn Center for Aboriginal Health, and being able to be part of that community like was a way for me to kind of I guess take care of myself and just being part of an organization in a community that like aligned and made sense to me was really important. I think same thing when I moved to Victoria for school, and the being part of like just all the different Indigenous student groups and stuff like that. So being able to kind of build that community and a network of support is really, really important, I think. But I wanted to talk a little bit too about what you were sharing, Sage, too, around the program you did. And I think when I went to UVic, I did the Indigenous governance program. So it also kind of was very decolonial in nature and challenged a lot of the ways we're taught, and what you were sharing around like the knowledge we value and the voices that we bring into the curriculum was very different. So I'm really grateful that I got to participate in a program like that, and through that program have Indigenous professors and be surrounded with Indigenous peers. So that definitely made the journey for me a lot easier. And I think for business school in particular, there's some great like initiatives that are happening to try to increase representation of Indigenous peoples in business and introduce those different concepts of commerce we were talking about earlier. And I was really privileged to be involved with a project out of the Beatty School of Business at Simon Fraser University in partnership with their Radius Lab, where they're creating case studies that are on Indigenous businesses and entrepreneurs. But it's not just about creating a business case study on an Indigenous business, which is an Indigenous business case study is, or sorry, a business case study is the kind of key tool they use to teach business curriculum. But it was also about changing the way we told the story, changing the way we had students interact with that story and reflect on it. It was not like a typical business case study. And I know there's great work happening out of UVic's School of Business as well. So I think things are changing a little bit. I think the business education has been a bit slower than some of the other departments to start to integrate Indigenous, values and ways of learning and teaching this type of content. But I think it's a slow moving task ahead. And when we see more Indigenous people taking up spaces in these different departments, such as business, as students and as PhD students or professors, they're able to kind of move the dial a little bit, which is really exciting.
That's really great. And I can definitely confirm, like coming from the business program at Womxn, that it is a slow moving machine. It is moving, it's trickling along, but it definitely, like you said, it is behind compared to some of these other programs in colleges and universities. And, it's one driving force that keeps me rooted, on like pursuing this business degree, is taking up that space. As an Indigenous woman, it's important to me to take up room in the business field, because I think, representation is so important, and we need to keep pushing forward. So thank you so much, both of you, for sharing. So my last question, so in terms of growth, can you provide any insights into how the Sage initiative is expanding, both in terms of new goals or maybe new programs? Is there any recent developments that the Sage initiative has undertaken to further your mission?
This is always fun, because Victoria is a really interesting place. There's a bunch of really rad Indigenous, they're influencers to me, Indigenous influencers here. Caroline Hilton, who founded the Indigenomics Institute and who wrote the book Indigenomics: Taking a Seat at the Economic Table. If you haven't read it, and this conversation has all felt relevant to you, I would highly recommend reading Indigenomics. It's one of our core texts for Sage Initiative. And every single time I talk to Carol Ann, she tells me about, she says, so she walks up to me and she's maybe 5'2", and she comes up to me and she gives me a big hug and she gets this look in her eye. She says, Sage, I have an idea. And then we exchanged these like beautiful, bold ideas that felt like sometimes it was scary to say new, bold ideas. But I found her, my dad as well is a really great site of support for me. He founded Raven Capital Indigenous Partners alongside his two managing partners. And they're really setting the stage and trailblazing for Indigenous impact investors around the world. Globally, people are watching and learning from their practices today. And so I have these giants that I'm trying to glean knowledge and information from. But one of my favorite things about Sage Initiative is that one of our core values is the pursuit of knowledge. It's always continuing on that pursuit of knowledge, always learning, always growing, and just kind of getting your hands around something, feeling it, trying something on for a minute and seeing how it feels, you know. So I think one really important thing to mention is that for myself, as a young founder and somebody who has complete a degree, it's not in economics, that commitment to learning. And so I'm taking specific courses, and Magnolia mentioned the Fireweed Fellowship. That was like a little bit more in terms of like kind of an investment readiness program, but just continuing learning about the nature of impact investment. It's so new, it's brand new. Like people really don't realize that it, like the term was only coined in like 2007. And it's just so brand new, and people are talking about it in this way that they're like, oh yes, like I've been interacting with this for so long, like all these things, like la la la. It's like, okay, but most people don't even know what impact investment is. Like when you say impact investment, 99% of the people you're talking to will have no idea what you mean exactly. And it becomes that awkward interaction where people are using terminology and acronyms and all of this finance talk that has meant to be really destabilizing for other folks. And so my commitment to always learning and also trying to speak frankly, say what I mean. I try to say what I mean and not talk like from this really posh voice that a lot of folks in finance choose to, not using acronyms a lot, or always really making sure to drill in acronyms before using them is really important. So that's on a personal level. Personally, that's my commitment, and that's how I'm working to grow myself and the community around me. In terms of like looking forward, the nature of Sage Initiative is building the capacity to make investments. And so in my ideal world, we would form what's called a financial intermediary. So being able to facilitate the flow of capital and the relationship between an entrepreneur, someone who has an idea, and an investor, someone who wants to invest capital into that idea. So my dream is to have a Sage Initiative intermediary in this near future. So keep your eyes and your ears open for us doing that work. And the overarching, like beautiful bubble, it's kind of like this like rose colored, like pretty Indigenous excellence bubble around all of that is that we're achieving our ultimate impact goals, which are outlined mostly in the UN DRIP, in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. That's how we do most of our impact measurement. And we say, this is the meter stick of where we want to get to in terms of making sure our people, Indigenous people, are benefiting from this solution. And so that's always kind of what's keeping our work moving forward. And our circle of matriarchs, my aunties and grannies who advise me, if I'm doing anything that is not in service of our people or Indigenous women or getting us to that impact goal, and if we're not using the most direct theory of change, like if we're kind of maybe taking a long route or making choices that are a bit more like ego-centered than they are about getting to that impact goal, then my aunties and my grannies will tell us, and they make sure that we're staying on that direct path. So in the next few years, it's just keeping our heads down and staying motivated through a global pandemic, through a recession, through potentially an election next year. You know, there's lots of fun stuff happening, and so it just means that we have to stay focused on our goals, which is to empower Indigenous communities and rematriate our economies, which were for a really long time guided by our clan mothers and by our matriarchs and by our aunties. So just sticking to my own and making sure that we're doing a really good job at the few services that we offer, and making sure that people walk away feeling like the tone that we set in this conversation today, feeling how much I like love every single person in our circle so much. My heart is like bleeding every circle we have. I'm so in love with each of them and their work, and want them to know how loved they are and how appreciated they are and how worthy they are and how much each of their voices is highly valued in the circle. And so that's my goal, and those are the things I'm doing to work towards it, and I'm proud of that. So that's where we're at.
And that's amazing, Sage. Congratulations. And I can feel the like passion and the love. It just radiates off of you. Like even just, you know, sitting across from you on Zoom, I can feel it through connecting over to me. And I'm so excited to see the growth of Sage Initiative, to see you like pursuing these new goals. And I'll continue to follow everything that you do. And I just want to thank you, Sage and Magnolia, for joining us today and sharing your knowledge with me. I'm walking away from this with a newfound understanding and a lot of empowerment. I'm feeling very empowered, and thank you so much. I'm so grateful to both of you.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you. And it's mentioned a couple times, you can find us all of the regular places at Sage Initiative. On Instagram, honestly, it's probably the most common way that people find us is on Instagram, or sageinitiative.ca is where you can apply to the upcoming session. But if you're more of like a LinkedIn person or like a Facebook person or wherever else, then you can find us in all of those places. And just like really wanting to hold you up, Magnolia, like you're definitely somebody I look up to and a role model in the space, and we've found each other at more and more sites and community events. And like I think that it's so important to recognize the people that you see out in community. You see their face, you see them showing up time and time again, and I see you every single time. And so I just really want to acknowledge you for that and say thank you for showing up for me here.
Of course. Thank you so much for inviting me. I said it before and I'll say it again really quickly. I love you, Sage, and I love what you're doing with the Sage Initiative. And I'm so excited for the next cohort that get to learn with you and really benefit from what the program has to offer. And if anyone ever wants to connect with me just to learn about my experience, my door is always open and happy to have a chat too. So thank you so much for putting this together.
Thank you so much, Magnolia. And I think I'll be connecting with you on LinkedIn after this. Yes.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Thank you so much, both of you, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Masicho.